NBC5 investigates in a massive 2-month case involving the ATF and Chicago police. All this to target illegal guns here in the Chicago area.
The Justice Department announcing charges in a major gun trafficking case involving a Chicago street gang.
NBCV investigates in a massive 2-month case involving the ATF and Chicago police. All this to target illegal guns here in the Chicago area. The Justice Department announcing charges in a major gun trafficking case involving a Chicago street gang. 6 to 12 a.m. Streeterville, Chicago. No sirens, no flashing lights, no warning. Only the low hum of engines as a convoy of unmarked SUVs moved through the financial district near Lake Michigan. They approached from 3 different directions, converging on a 48-story glass tower overlooking the shoreline. At the top of the tower sat a penthouse valued at over $12 million, registered under the name of the sitting mayor of Chicago, Eleanor Grace Whitmore. For nearly 8 years, she had led one of the largest cities in the United States, a public figure trusted by more than 2.7 million residents, a leader no one expected to be under federal investigation. Within seconds, every access point was sealed. A total of 27 federal agents stepped out in silence. FBI, ATF, and DHS each fully briefed, each moving with precision. This was not a routine search warrant. This was a coordinated federal operation, authorized at the highest level of national security. The signal was given. The front door was breached in under 6 seconds. A decisive strike without hesitation, tactical teams moved in immediately, clearing the lower floors, then the private offices, and finally the residential levels above. The entire penthouse spanning nearly 8,000 square ft was secured in less than 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Inside, Mayor Whitmore was found alone in her office. No resistance, no attempt to flee, only silence. Minutes later, her hands were cuffed. She was escorted out and transferred into federal custody. The initial charges appeared straightforward: abuse of power, financial misconduct, undisclosed assets potentially exceeding $1.7 million. But for the agents inside that penthouse, something didn't add up. Operations like this do not deploy 27 agents before dawn for paperwork violations. They began searching deeper. Behind a private library, one agent noticed structural inconsistencies, incorrect dimensions, misaligned measurements, spacing that did not match the architectural plans. That was the moment everything changed. The false wall was breached, and behind it a hidden room, a sealed space that was never meant to be found. And at that moment, this was no longer an investigation into a mayor. This was a systemic issue buried deep beneath the surface of power itself. As they stepped down into the basement, no one said a word. The space below was completely isolated from the rest of the residence. A sealed room measuring approximately 3.66, 4.8 meter. No windows, temperature controlled, fully shielded by an independent electronic system. At the center of the room were 5 high-security digital safes, all of them connected to a central locking system. The system was opened, and that was when they saw it. Stacks of US dollars tightly bound, labeled, packed into every compartment. Initial estimates exceeded $9.8 million in cash. No one spoke, but everyone understood this was not a routine financial violation. And then they turned to the right side of the room. What stood there was not storage. It was an operations station, 3 encrypted laptops, 2 independent servers, a digital control panel displaying real-time transaction flows. The numbers kept moving. The transfer routes kept shifting. Everything was still running even as they stood there. This was not where money was stored. This was where it was managed. Digital forensics specialists quickly confirmed it. The entire system had been built on a network of 48 shell companies stretching from Eastern Europe through the Middle East to offshore financial hubs in the Caribbean. Each transaction was broken into smaller fragments, layered, redirected, and disguised as legitimate business activity. Over 6 years, the system had processed a total of more than $4.1 billion in financial movement. No spikes, no sudden anomalies, just a steady, controlled flow designed to avoid detection. But the most alarming discovery was not the money, not the false identities. It was an encrypted data file buried deep within the system linked to illegal weapons, a list of locations, seaports, warehouses, transit hubs, coordinates tied to transport routes near the U.S.-Mexico border. The number was estimated at nearly 1,200 assault rifles. This was no longer financial corruption. This was a cross-border trafficking network, and it had been operating from within the system of the United States itself. At 7:02 a.m., Federal Command was notified. The scope of the investigation was officially expanded. What began as a targeted arrest had now become a multi-agency case involving financial crime, cross-border operations, and organized criminal networks. Everyone understood the person they had just arrested was not the center of this system. Only a link in the chain, and the penthouse above was just an access point. At 7:40 a.m., inside the Federal Encrypted Data Analysis Room, forensic analysts continued extracting information from the first confirmed model. These were not commercial shipments. They were weapons. Within minutes, a sequence of encoded entries was decrypted. Each line corresponded to a specific route: point of origin, transit point, final destination. The routes formed a network stretching from the Midwest to the southern border, then further into Mexico and extending across Eastern Europe. Over the past 6 years, this system had coordinated the transport of more than 200 assault rifles and over 320 semi-automatic weapon systems. Each shipment was divided into smaller units, typically ranging from 20 to 40 firearms per container. To avoid suspicion, analysts identified at least 17 active transport routes, many of which passed through major distribution corridors in Texas before crossing the border. From there, the weapons were redirected to conflict zones and black market networks overseas. The method was precise. Every shipment was disguised, declared as industrial machinery. Mechanical components, construction equipment, documentation matched the cargo. Weight classifications were adjusted to align with legitimate goods. And most critically, the containers were marked under priority clearance protocols, allowing them to bypass secondary federal inspection. By 7:52 a.m., temperature logs revealed another layer of data. Certain shipments were recorded under controlled refrigeration conditions, typically reserved for sensitive equipment. But the recorded temperatures showed repeated anomalies, levels inconsistent with standard industrial storage requirements. It was a signature indicator, a pattern used to distinguish controlled cargo within a larger system. This was not random smuggling. This was a structured operation. Deeper analysis revealed the network's operational capacity. At peak efficiency, it could move between 150 and 200 weapons per week without triggering detection systems. Over time, that translated into thousands of weapons circulating within the network, and the financial side matched the scale. Each shipment corresponded to structured payments ranging from $2 million to $8 million routed through the previously identified shell companies. Funds were transferred offshore, then cycled back under the cover of legitimate business revenue. No direct links, no clear origin, just a continuous loop. By 8:02 a.m., one final detail emerged. Several shipping logs were marked with encrypted authentication signatures. A single identifier appeared repeatedly across multiple routes, multiple years, and multiple transactions. When analysts cross-referenced that signature with internal system access logs recovered from the Penthouse, the result was immediate. The access was tied to a single user, Mayor Eleanor Grace Whitmore. At that moment, the investigation crossed a new threshold. This was no longer a case of hidden assets or indirect involvement. This was command authority and the network they had uncovered. Every operation was under her control. But then the situation shifted. The analysts were stunned to realize the network was not hers alone. It was an organization. What the agents uncovered was no longer a smuggling route or even a network. It was a system structured, layered, protected. Inside the concealed servers, analysts dug deeper beyond shipping logs and financial records. They discovered a second operational framework, one that connected people to the movement of weapons, not just operators, not just transporters, officials. At 8:12 a.m., a secured file was decrypted. It contained a list, 29 names, each entry tied to a role: port inspectors, logistics coordinators, licensing officers, private contractors. Some worked at shipping terminals. Others operated within city offices. A few held positions that allowed direct oversight of infrastructure and compliance systems, all connected. Each name linked to specific transaction channels and transport routes. As the data was mapped in real time, the structure became clear. 17 active transport corridors supported by 9 controlled storage facilities, all operating on synchronized schedules. Nothing moved at random. Every shipment was approved, tracked, and cleared through multiple layers of authorization. And at the center of it all was a single access point: Mayor Eleanor Grace Whitmore. By 9:07 a.m., investigators determined how the system sustained itself. The financial model was built on fragmentation. Instead of large, traceable transfers, Each payment was broken into smaller amounts, typically ranging from $1.5 million to $3 million per transaction. They were routed through shell companies disguised as infrastructure investments, logistics contracts, or consulting agreements. Over more than 6 years, the total flow exceeded $4.1 billion. No spikes, no alarms, only precision. But the most critical element was not the money, it was access. As mayor, Whitmore had the authority to approve key city functions, infrastructure permits, zoning adjustments, contract authorizations tied to transportation and logistics. In theory, these were routine administrative procedures. In practice, they were gateways, approvals that allowed specific shipments to move without delay, contracts that granted control over warehouse space, adjustments that redirected inspection priorities away from targeted routes. This system was not evading oversight. It was operating within it. At 9:12 a.m., cross-referencing began. Several individuals on the list had direct communication logs connected to Whitmore's private system. Encrypted messages, time-stamped instructions, route confirmations, movement authorizations, every action aligned with known shipment activity. This was coordination at scale. Not influence, not passive involvement, control. And then came the final detail. Among the 29 identified individuals, at least 12 held positions requiring federal authorization or cooperation. That meant the network was not confined to the local level. It had penetrated multiple layers of oversight extending beyond city boundaries. By 10:18 a.m., Federal Command issued a new directive. This was now a multi-agency national security investigation, because the question was no longer how the system operated. The question was how long it had been protected and how many others were still inside it. At 10:38 a.m., the decision was made. This was no longer an isolated investigation. It was a coordinated federal take-on operation. Within minutes, orders were issued across multiple jurisdictions. Teams were mobilized in silence. No public announcement, no leaks to the media, only synchronized movement. At 11:05 a.m., the first wave began. Simultaneous operations were executed across 14 locations in 3 states: warehouses, private offices, logistics centers, residential properties directly connected to the network. More than 120 federal agents were deployed, supported by tactical units and federal law enforcement. Every target had been pre-identified. Every second was calculated. At 12:12 a.m., the first site was breached. Inside a warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, agents uncovered a concealed storage area behind stacked industrial containers. Within minutes, they located multiple sealed units. When opened, the contents confirmed what the system had already revealed: weapons. At first, dozens, then hundreds. By 12:25 a.m., preliminary figures showed more than 300 firearms recovered from a single location, including assault rifles and modified semi-automatic systems. Serial numbers had been partially erased. Components had been altered to avoid detection, and that was just one site. Across all locations, the numbers escalated rapidly. By 1:10 p.m., Federal Command reported a total seizure of more than 800 firearms along with millions of rounds of ammunition, specialized components, and distribution records tied to shipments scheduled for the next 72 hours. At the same time, arrests were underway. One by one, individuals identified in the encrypted system were taken into custody: port officials, logistics managers, corporate intermediaries. By midday, a total of 29 suspects had been arrested without incident. No resistance, no warning, only silence. Back in Chicago, the impact was immediate. At 2:30 p.m., federal prosecutors formally charged Mayor Eleanor Grace Whitmore. The indictment included 14 federal counts ranging from large-scale weapons trafficking and international smuggling operations to money laundering exceeding $4.1 billion, abuse of power, and conspiracy to evade federal oversight systems. Each charge was supported by direct evidence, digital logs, financial records, authorization signatures, all traced back to her private system. Legal analysts quickly assessed the consequences. If convicted on all counts, Whitmore could face up to 50 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release under federal guidelines. But the impact extended far beyond a single individual. By early afternoon, the city of Chicago initiated an emergency internal review. Every contract signed under Whitmore's administration, every permit approved, every infrastructure decision tied to logistics and transport corridors. Nothing was exempt because the investigation had revealed something deeper than corruption. It had exposed a system operating in plain sight, a network that had moved billions of dollars and thousands of weapons over 6 years without detection. And as the final reports began to emerge, one truth became impossible to ignore. The operation had been stopped. But it was not the only one. And for the agencies now involved, the question was no longer what had been uncovered. The question was what still remains out.